The words came out of his mouth like a business proposal. Cold, measured, final. I need someone who can give me what you cannot. Virginia sat perfectly still in the leather chair, her hands folded in her lap, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light that streamed through the tall windows of the Beaumont family parlor. She had been sitting in this same chair when the doctor called with the results 3 days ago. She had been sitting here when she told Everett. And now she was sitting here as her husband of 4 years explained why their marriage was over. Everett stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the marble mantle that had been in his family for 5 generations. He was wearing the gray suit she had helped him pick out for the shareholders' meeting last month. She remembered smoothing his lapels, telling him he looked powerful. He had kissed her forehead and called her his good luck charm. That was 23 days ago. Before the tests. Before the diagnosis. Before the word that would define the rest of her life. Barren. The doctors used other terms. Diminished ovarian reserve. Statistically unlikely. They spoke about options and alternatives and medical advances. But Everett had heard only one thing, and he had made his decision with the same efficiency he applied to underperforming acquisitions. "You understand," he said. His voice carried no anger, no grief, nothing that might suggest this was difficult for him. "The Beaumont legacy requires an heir. A blood heir. I thought you understood that when we married." Virginia found her voice somewhere in the hollow space where her heart used to be. "We could adopt. There are other ways to build a family. Everett, please. 4 years. Everything we have built together. Does none of it matter?" Everett looked at her then, and she saw something flicker across his face. For one moment, she thought it might be doubt. Regret. Love. It was impatience. The Beaumont name has been carried by blood for 140 years. I will not be the one to break that chain. My lawyers will be in touch about the arrangements. I have tried to be generous, considering the circumstances. Considering the circumstances. As if she had failed an inspection. As if her body's inability to conceive was a breach of contract, a violation of warranty, a defect that entitled him to return her for a refund. "Everett," she whispered. "Please. I love you." He straightened his cufflinks. The gesture was so familiar, so ordinary, that it broke something inside her. "I am sorry, Virginia. I truly am. But some things are more important than love." He walked out of the parlor without looking back. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard him speaking to someone on his phone about a dinner reservation, heard the front door close behind him. Virginia sat in the leather chair as the afternoon light faded to evening. She sat as the household staff moved quietly around her, uncertain what to say. She sat until the room grew dark and cold and she understood, finally, that she was alone. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. The divorce was finalized in June. Everett's lawyers had been thorough, as he had promised. The prenuptial agreement she had signed at 23, too young and too in love to read carefully, ensured that she left the marriage with almost nothing. A small settlement. Her personal belongings. The clothes she had brought into the marriage 4 years earlier, most of which no longer fit the life she had been living as Mrs. Everett Beaumont III. The Charleston newspapers covered the divorce with the polite cruelty that Southern society had perfected over centuries. They did not use the word Barren in print, but they might as well have. Beaumont heir seeks new chapter. Prominent family announces dissolution. Sources close to the family cite irreconcilable differences. Everyone knew what irreconcilable differences meant. Everyone knew why a man like Everett Beaumont would end a marriage to a woman like Virginia. The whispers followed her through every grocery store, every coffee shop, every sidewalk in the city where she had built her life. "Such a shame," they said. "She seemed so healthy. You never can tell, can you? He will find someone else soon enough. A man like that cannot wait forever." Virginia stopped going out. She stopped answering the phone. She packed her belongings into 2 suitcases and booked a one-way flight to Edinburgh, where her older sister Beatrice had lived for the past decade. She did not tell Everett she was leaving. She did not tell anyone. She simply vanished from Charleston like a ghost that had never belonged there in the first place. The flight was long and empty. Virginia watched the clouds pass beneath the plane and tried to imagine who she would be when she landed. Not Mrs. Beaumont. Not the junior curator at the Charleston Museum of Art who had caught the eye of the city's most eligible bachelor at a gallery opening 6 years ago. Not the woman who had believed, foolishly, that love could transcend the expectations of old money and older traditions. She would be Virginia Aldridge again. Just Virginia. Starting over at 27 with nothing but 2 suitcases and the shattered remains of a life she had thought would last forever. Beatrice met her at the airport with a coat and an umbrella and a look that said she already knew everything. She did not ask questions during the taxi ride to her small flat in Leith. She did not offer platitudes or advice. She simply helped Virginia carry her suitcases up 3 flights of stairs and showed her the spare room that would be her home for as long as she needed it. "It is small," Beatrice said. "But it is yours. For as long as you need." Virginia looked at the narrow bed, the single window overlooking a gray Edinburgh street, the closet barely large enough for her 2 suitcases. "It is perfect," she said. And then she sat on the bed and wept for the first time since Everett had walked out of the parlor. Beatrice held her through the night. She brought tea and tissues and said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say. Some griefs are too large for words. They can only be endured, minute by minute, hour by hour, until eventually the pain becomes bearable enough to survive. 6 weeks passed. Virginia began to eat again, to sleep again, to imagine that perhaps there might be a future beyond the wreckage of her marriage. She started looking for work, sending her resume to museums and galleries, trying to remember the woman she had been before she became someone's wife. And then, on a gray Tuesday morning, everything changed again. She had been feeling unwell for days. Nausea in the mornings. Exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. She assumed it was stress, grief, her body processing the trauma of the past months. But Beatrice was a nurse, and Beatrice noticed things. "Virginia," she said one morning over breakfast, "when was your last period?" Virginia looked up from her tea. She tried to remember. Before the divorce, certainly. Before the doctor's appointment. Before Everett's cold announcement in the family parlor. She had been so consumed by the ending of her marriage that she had not noticed the absence of something so fundamental. "I do not know," she admitted. "Weeks. Maybe longer. But that is impossible. You know what the doctors said." Beatrice was already standing, reaching for her coat. "The doctors said unlikely. They did not say impossible. I am going to the pharmacy. Stay here." Virginia sat at the kitchen table, her tea growing cold, her mind refusing to process what Beatrice was suggesting. It could not be. The specialists had been clear. Her ovarian reserve was diminished. Natural conception was statistically improbable. That was why Everett had left. That was why her marriage had ended. That was the truth she had accepted, however painfully. Beatrice returned 20 minutes later with a paper bag. She handed it to Virginia without a word and pointed toward the bathroom. The next 3 minutes were the longest of Virginia's life. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, the test resting on the sink, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold them still. She thought about Everett in his gray suit, explaining that some things were more important than love. She thought about the Charleston newspapers and their polite cruelty. She thought about the word Barren, spoken and unspoken, defining her worth as a woman and a wife. The timer on her phone went off. Virginia looked at the test. 2 lines. Unmistakable. Undeniable. Positive. She did not move. She could not move. The world had tilted on its axis and she was clinging to the edge, trying to understand how everything she believed about herself had been wrong. Beatrice knocked on the bathroom door. "Virginia." "What does it say?" Virginia opened the door. She held out the test. She watched her sister's face cycle through shock, confusion, joy, and then something more complicated. Something that looked like fear. "You have to tell him," Beatrice said. "Virginia, this changes everything. He has a right to know. Virginia looked at the test in her hand. She thought about Everett's face when he told her the marriage was over. She thought about the word defective, which he had never said but which hung in the air between them like smoke. She thought about what it would mean to go back, to present herself at his door with proof that the doctors had been wrong, to watch him calculate the value of her restored fertility. "No," she said. Beatrice stared at her. "Virginia, you cannot be serious. This is his child too. He deserves to know." Virginia's hand moved to her stomach, still flat, still showing no sign of the miracle growing inside her. "He told me I could not give him what he needed. He divorced me because he believed I was broken. He chose his legacy over our marriage, over me, over everything we had built together. He does not deserve to know." "But what about the baby? What about child support, legal rights, all of it?" Virginia sat down on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tile wall. She thought about the life her child would have as a Beaumont heir. The expectations. The pressure. The same cold calculations about bloodlines and legacy that had destroyed her marriage. She thought about Everett's father, who had died of a heart attack at 54, consumed by the weight of the family name. She thought about Everett's mother, Augustine, who had spent her life performing the role of perfect Beaumont wife. "This baby will have a different life," Virginia said slowly. "A life without the burden of that name. Without a father who sees children as obligations rather than gifts. This baby will know love, real love, not the conditional approval of a family that measures worth in bloodlines and inheritance." Beatrice knelt beside her. "Virginia, this is not something you can undo. If you make this choice, you are making it forever. For you and for this child." Virginia looked at her sister. She felt something new kindling in her chest, something that felt almost like strength. "I know," she said, "and I am making it." The weeks that followed were a blur of doctor's appointments and difficult conversations. Virginia learned that she was not carrying one baby but two. Twins. A boy and a girl, growing together in the same womb that Everett's doctors had declared inadequate. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that she almost laughed when the ultrasound technician pointed to the two tiny heartbeats on the screen. "Congratulations," the technician said. "You are having twins." Virginia stared at the monitor. Two children. Two pieces of herself and Everett, created in the last weeks of their marriage, growing inside her while he filed the divorce papers and moved on with his life. She thought about calling him. She thought about it every day for the first month, and then every week, and then hardly at all. Each time, she imagined the conversation. His voice on the phone. His surprise, his calculation, his immediate pivot to legal considerations and custody arrangements. She imagined the Beaumont lawyers descending on her modest Edinburgh life, fighting for control of the heirs she was carrying. No. She would not give him that power. She would not let her children become chess pieces in his game of legacy and ambition. The twins were born in February, on a night when Edinburgh was buried under 6 inches of snow. Marguerite came first, wailing furiously, already protesting the indignity of birth. Claire followed 4 minutes later, quiet and watchful, her gray-blue eyes taking in the world with an expression of solemn curiosity. Virginia held them both in the hospital bed, exhausted and overwhelmed and filled with a love so fierce it frightened her. They had their father's eyes. She saw it immediately, the distinctive gray-blue that had been passed down through 4 generations of Beaumonts. They had his jawline too, and something in the shape of their noses that came from a family they would never know. "Hello," she whispered to them. "I am your mother, and I am going to give you everything." The first years were the hardest. Virginia worked part-time at a small restoration firm while Beatrice helped with childcare. Money was tight. Space was tighter. The 3 of them shared Beatrice's spare room, 2 cribs crowded against the walls, laundry hanging from every available surface. But they were happy. Virginia discovered strengths she did not know she possessed. She learned to function on 4 hours of sleep. She learned to change 2 diapers simultaneously. She learned to find joy in small moments, in first smiles and first words and first steps. The twins grew. Maggie became fierce and outspoken, defending her sister from playground bullies with a ferocity that startled teachers. Claire remained quiet and observant, watching the world with those Beaumont eyes, missing nothing. They asked about their father, of course. Children always do. Maggie was 5 the first time she asked. They were walking home from nursery school, and a classmate had been talking about his daddy teaching him to ride a bicycle. "Mummy," Maggie said, "where is our daddy?" Virginia had prepared for this question. She had rehearsed her answer 100 times. "Your daddy lives far away," she said carefully. "We were married once, but it did not work out. He does not know about you." "Why not?" Virginia knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Because sometimes, when grown-ups make mistakes, the kindest thing is to start fresh. Your daddy was not ready to be a father. Maybe someday, when you are older, we can talk more about it." Maggie considered this with the gravity that only a 5-year-old can muster. "Is that why we do not have his name?" "Yes," Virginia said. "You have my name. You are Aldridge's. And that is something to be proud of." Maggie nodded slowly. "I like being an Aldridge," she decided. "Can we get ice cream?" Virginia laughed and took her daughter's hand. "Yes," she said. "We can get ice cream." The years passed like water, sometimes slow, sometimes rushing, always carrying them forward. Virginia's career blossomed in ways she could never have predicted. Her eye for historic detail, the same skill that had made her a promising curator in Charleston, translated perfectly into architectural restoration. She started with small projects, friends' homes and commercial spaces, building a reputation one careful renovation at a time. By the time the twins were 10, Aldridge Heritage Restorations had a staff of 12. By 12, they had offices in Edinburgh and London. By 15, Virginia was being featured in international design magazines, her firm responsible for some of the most celebrated historic property restorations in Europe. She had built something remarkable. She had done it alone, without the Beaumont name, without Everett's connections, without anything but her own talent and determination. The twins built something remarkable too. They built themselves. Maggie threw herself into music, spending hours at the piano, playing with a passion that filled their Edinburgh townhouse with sound. She was fierce and loyal, quick to anger and quicker to forgive, her father's intensity channeled into protective love for her mother and sister. Claire was different. Quieter, more watchful, she gravitated toward art and architecture. She would spend weekends at her mother's restoration sites, sketching the bones of old buildings, asking questions about load-bearing walls and original fixtures. Her sketchbooks filled with drawings of structures, of spaces, of the history hidden in stone and timber. They were extraordinary, these daughters of hers. Virginia watched them grow with a pride so deep it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. But always, beneath the surface, there was a question they had not yet answered. A truth they had not yet told. A father who did not know they existed. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away, Everett Beaumont was building an empire. In the 17 years since his divorce from Virginia, he had transformed Beaumont Hospitality from a regional luxury brand into a global powerhouse. Hotels in London, Dubai, Singapore, New York. A fleet of charter yachts serving the world's wealthiest travelers. A real estate portfolio worth billions. He appeared on magazine covers and spoke at industry conferences. He donated to the right charities and supported the right politicians. He had become everything his father and grandfather had hoped he would be, the most successful Beaumont in 5 generations. And he was utterly, completely alone. His second marriage had lasted 3 years. Celeste was young and beautiful and from an old Savannah family, exactly the kind of woman his mother had always hoped he would marry. The wedding had been covered in all the right magazines. The divorce, when it came, was quieter. Irreconcilable differences, the lawyers said. No children. The whispers started after that. Perhaps the problem had not been Virginia after all. Perhaps the Beaumont heir was the one with the deficiency. Charleston society spoke of it in hushed tones, at garden parties and charity galas, always careful to fall silent when Everett appeared. He heard the whispers anyway. He always did. There were other women after Celeste. Younger, usually. Ambitious, always. But none of them lasted, and none of them produced the heir that Everett still desperately wanted. He underwent tests of his own, secretly, in a clinic in Atlanta where no one would recognize his name. The results were inconclusive. Possible, but unlikely, the doctors said. Sometimes these things cannot be explained. He was 51 years old, and he would be the last Beaumont of his line. The legacy his grandfather had built, that his father had maintained, that he had expanded into a global empire, would end with him. There would be no son to carry the name forward. No daughter to marry well and continue the bloodline. Just Everett, alone in his penthouse, surrounded by success and haunted by failure. His mother, Augustine, spoke to him about it sometimes. She was 78 now, her health declining, her mind still sharp. She had never approved of his divorce from Virginia, had never said so directly, but had made her feelings clear through 1,000 small silences and pointed absences. "You made a mistake," she told him one afternoon, sitting in her private parlor at the family estate. "That girl loved you, truly loved you. And you threw her away." Everett stiffened in his chair. "Mother, that was 17 years ago. Virginia has moved on. So have I. Have you?" Augustine's eyes were too knowing for comfort. "You are 51 years old with no wife and no children. Is that what you call moving on? The Beaumont name will survive. Will it?" Augustine shook her head slowly. "I used to believe as you do, that names and bloodlines were everything. But I am old now, and I see things differently. Legacy is not about names on buildings. It is about the people we love and the love we leave behind." Everett said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I wonder sometimes," Augustine continued, "what became of Virginia? She was always too good for you, you know. I hope she found someone who deserved her." Everett left shortly after that, making excuses about meetings and obligations. But his mother's words followed him through the day and into the night, joining the chorus of regrets that he refused to acknowledge. He did not wonder about Virginia. He did not allow himself to wonder. She was the past, a closed chapter, a mistake he had corrected. Whatever had become of her was no longer his concern. Except that sometimes, late at night, he would search for her name online. Just to see. Just to know. The first time he did it, there was nothing. Virginia Aldridge had vanished from the internet as completely as she had vanished from Charleston. But over the years, that changed. A small mention here, a professional profile there. And then, about 10 years after the divorce, a feature article in a British architecture magazine about a promising restoration firm in Edinburgh. Aldridge Heritage Restorations. Virginia Aldridge, founder and principal designer. He read the article 3 times. He studied the photograph of her standing in front of a half-restored Georgian building, hard hat in hand, smiling at the camera. She looked different than he remembered. Confident. Radiant. Happy. He closed the browser window and did not search for her name again. But he did not forget. The invitation to the annual Beaumont Autumn Gala went out in early October. Everett reviewed the guest list personally, as he did every year, adding and removing names with the precision of a conductor arranging an orchestra. This year's gala would be held aboard the Augustine, the flagship of the Beaumont yacht fleet, named in honor of his mother. 400 guests. The cream of Charleston society, plus business partners and dignitaries from around the world. It would be the social event of the season, as it had been every year for the past decade. Everett paused over one name on the list. He had added it himself, 3 days ago, in a moment of impulse he could not quite explain. Virginia Aldridge. Current address, Edinburgh, Scotland. His assistant, Catherine, noticed his hesitation. "Is something wrong, Mr. Beaumont?" Everett looked at the name. "This invitation," he said. "The one to Miss Aldridge. Make sure it includes a personal note. Something from me." Catherine raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She had worked for Everett for 15 years and had learned when not to ask questions. "What would you like the note to say?" Everett considered. He thought about his mother's words. He thought about the magazine article and the photograph. He thought about 17 years of silence and the woman who had once loved him enough to beg him not to leave. "Just say that it has been too long," he said finally, "and that I hope time has been kind to her." He told himself he was being generous. Gracious. extending an olive branch after so many years. He was successful and content, and he wanted Virginia to see that he harbored no ill will. That was what he told himself. The truth, buried beneath layers of pride and self-deception, was something else entirely. He wanted to see her. He wanted to know what had become of the woman he had discarded. He wanted, in some dark corner of his soul, to confirm that he had made the right choice. That she was diminished by the years, worn down by the single life he had condemned her to. That he, Everett Beaumont, had been right to prioritize legacy over love. He wanted vindication. He wanted proof that he had won. The invitation arrived in Edinburgh on a gray October morning. Virginia stood in the kitchen of her restored Georgian townhouse, the cream-colored envelope heavy in her hands. She recognized the crest immediately, the Beaumont family seal, unchanged in all the years since she had last seen it on divorce papers and legal notices. Her first instinct was to throw it away, to burn it without reading and pretend it had never come. 17 years of careful silence, of building a life without him, and now this intrusion, this reminder of everything she had escaped. But she did not throw it away. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope with steady hands. The invitation was formal and expected. The Beaumont Hospitality Group Annual Autumn Gala. Aboard the Augustine. November the 15th. Black tie requested. Beneath the printed text, a handwritten note in familiar script. Virginia. It has been too long. I hope time has been kind to you. Everett. She read the words 3 times, searching for the meaning beneath them. What did he want? Why now, after 17 years of silence? And then she understood. He wanted to see what had become of her. He wanted to measure her against his own success. He wanted, after all these years, to feel vindicated in his choice. Virginia set the invitation on the table. She looked around her kitchen, at the beautiful home she had restored with her own hands, at the evidence of the life she had built without him. She should throw the invitation away. She should continue the silence that had protected her and her daughters for 17 years. But her daughters were 16 now. They were asking more questions, wanting more answers. They deserved to know where they came from, even if they had no intention of staying. And perhaps, Virginia thought, perhaps it was time for Everett Beaumont to see exactly what he had thrown away. Mum. What is that? Maggie appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her school uniform, her dark hair escaping from its ponytail. Claire followed close behind, quieter as always, her gray-blue eyes taking in the scene with characteristic perception. Virginia looked at her daughters. She saw Everett in both of them, in the set of their jaws and the color of their eyes, in the proud bearing they had inherited without ever knowing its source. "Sit down," she said. "Both of you. There is something I need to tell you." The twins exchanged glances and sat at the table. They had learned to recognize this tone in their mother's voice, the one she used when something important was about to be said. Virginia picked up the invitation. "This is from your father," she said. "He is hosting a gala in Charleston next month. He has invited me to attend." The silence that followed was absolute. Maggie's face went through a rapid series of expressions, confusion to understanding to anger. Claire remained still, her eyes fixed on the invitation, processing. "Why now?" Maggie demanded. "Why after all this time?" Virginia shook her head. "I do not know. Perhaps he wants to see what became of me. Perhaps he is feeling nostalgic. Perhaps it is simply arrogance." Claire spoke for the first time. "You said he does not know about us." "He does not," Virginia confirmed. "When I left Charleston, I was not yet aware that I was pregnant. By the time I found out, the divorce was final. I made the decision not to tell him." "Why?" Maggie's voice was sharp, accusatory, but Virginia heard the hurt beneath it. Virginia reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Because he divorced me for being unable to have children. He called me defective. He chose his legacy over our marriage, over me, over everything we had built together. I decided that you deserved better than a father who saw children as obligations rather than gifts." Maggie pulled her hand away. "That was not your decision to make." Virginia felt the words like a blow. "You are right," she said quietly. It was not. But I was 27 years old, alone in a foreign country, pregnant with twins by a man who had thrown me away. I made the best decision I could with what I had. I cannot change it now, even if I wanted to. Claire was still staring at the invitation. "Are you going to go?" she asked. Virginia looked at her younger daughter, at the thoughtful expression so like her own, at the Beaumont eyes that saw everything. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have spent 17 years building a life without him. I do not need his approval or his acceptance." "But you want something," Claire said. "Or you would have thrown that invitation away already." Virginia smiled despite herself. Her daughter knew her too well. "I want closure," she said. "I want to walk into that gala as the woman I have become, not the broken girl he remembers. I want him to see that I did not need him to survive, that I thrived without him." "And us?" Maggie asked. "Do you want him to see us too?" The question hung in the air between them. Virginia had not allowed herself to think that far ahead, but now that Maggie had asked it, she could not deny the truth. "Yes," she said slowly. "I want him to see exactly what he threw away. Not for revenge. Not to hurt him. But because you deserve to know where you came from. And because he should know, after all these years, that he was wrong about me." Maggie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Softer. "I want to meet him," she said. "I want to see for myself what kind of man he is." Claire nodded. "So do I," she said. "But on our terms. Not as his heirs. As Mum's daughters." Virginia looked at her girls, these two extraordinary young women she had raised alone, and felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Then we will go," she said. "Together." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Virginia threw herself into the details, choosing outfits and making travel arrangements and trying not to think too hard about what they were about to do. The twins dealt with the news in their own ways. Maggie was angry, protective, ready to fight on her mother's behalf. She spent hours at the piano, playing furious pieces that shook the windows and rattled the walls. Claire was quieter, more contemplative, filling her sketchbooks with drawings of Charleston architecture, learning everything she could about the place that had produced her father. They talked about Everett in the evenings, sitting together in the living room, Virginia answering questions she had avoided for 16 years. "What was he like?" Claire asked one night. "When you first met him?" Virginia considered the question carefully. "He was charming," she said. "Confident. He walked into a room and everyone noticed. He made me feel like the most important person in the world." "So what happened?" Virginia was quiet for a moment. "I think he believed his own mythology," she said finally. "He grew up being told that the Beaumont name was everything, that his purpose was to continue the legacy his grandfather had built. When it seemed like I could not give him children, he saw it as a failure. His failure, really, but he could not admit that. It was easier to blame me." Maggie looked up from her phone. "That is pathetic." Virginia smiled sadly. "It is human," she said. "People do terrible things when they are afraid." "I am not going to forgive him," Maggie said. "Just so you know." "I am not asking you to," Virginia replied. "I am only asking you to meet him with open eyes. You can form your own opinions." Claire was quiet through this exchange, as she often was. But late that night, she came to Virginia's room, unable to sleep. "Mum," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Are you sure about this?" Virginia looked at her daughter, at the worry in those gray-blue eyes. "No," she admitted. "I am not sure about anything. But I think we need to do it anyway. I think we have been hiding from this long enough." Claire nodded slowly. "I have been reading about him online," she said. "He seems successful. But in the interviews, in the photographs, he looks unhappy." Virginia said nothing. "I do not want to be like him," Claire continued. "I do not want to spend my life building things and have nothing real to show for it." Virginia reached out and took her daughter's hand. "You are nothing like him," she said. "You never will be. You know what matters. You know that love is more important than legacy." Claire squeezed her hand. Because you taught us, she said. Because you chose us over everything else. Virginia felt tears prick her eyes. It was the easiest choice I ever made, she said. And I would make it again 1,000 times. The night before their flight to Charleston, Virginia stood in her bedroom, looking at herself in the mirror. She was wearing the burgundy gown she had chosen for the gala, simple and elegant, the kind of dress that made a statement without shouting. She was 51 years old. There were lines around her eyes and threads of gray in her dark hair. She had earned every one of them. 17 years ago, she had left Charleston with nothing. Tomorrow, she would return with everything. She thought about Everett, waiting on his yacht, expecting a broken woman. Expecting vindication. He was going to be very surprised. The flight was long but uneventful. Virginia slept poorly, waking every few hours to check on the twins, who dozed in their seats with the easy rest of youth. Charleston announced itself through the airplane window, the familiar coastline coming into view, the city where she had fallen in love and had her heart broken spreading out beneath them like a map of memory. Virginia had not been back in 17 years. She had expected the sight to hurt, to reopen old wounds. Instead, she felt a strange calm settling over her. She was not the same woman who had left. She had nothing to fear from this place anymore. They checked into a hotel downtown, not a Beaumont property. Virginia made sure of that. The suite was comfortable but unremarkable, chosen for its anonymity rather than its amenities. Maggie and Claire explored the room restlessly while Virginia stood on the balcony, looking out at the harbor. The yacht was visible in the distance, gleaming white against the darkening water, lights already beginning to twinkle as the crew prepared for the evening's event. The Augustine, named after his mother. A monument to legacy, floating on the water. Mum. Maggie appeared at her elbow. It is time to get ready. Virginia took a deep breath. She looked at her daughter, at the fierce determination in those young eyes. Are you ready? She asked. Maggie smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I have been ready for 16 years, she said. The water taxi cut across Charleston Harbor as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Virginia sat between her daughters, watching the yacht grow larger as they approached. Music drifted across the water. Laughter. The clink of crystal glasses and the murmur of privileged conversation. 400 of Charleston's most prominent citizens gathered to celebrate Everett Beaumont and his achievements. Virginia smoothed the fabric of her gown. She touched the pearls at her throat, her mother's pearls, the only valuable thing she had brought from her old life. Remember, she told the twins, we are not here to cause a scene. We are here to be seen. Whatever happens, stay calm. Do not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Claire nodded solemnly. Maggie's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The water taxi pulled alongside the yacht. A uniformed crew member extended a hand to help them aboard. Welcome to the Augustine, he said. May I see your invitation? Virginia handed it over, watching his eyes scan the card, watching his expression flicker with something like recognition. Ms. Aldridge. Of course. Mr. Beaumont mentioned you specifically. Please, follow me. They were led up a gangway to the main deck, where the party was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers hung from the yacht's upper structure, casting soft light over women in designer gowns and men in perfectly tailored suits. A jazz quartet played softly in one corner. Champagne flowed from what seemed like an endless supply. Virginia had attended parties like this before, 17 years ago, on Everett's arm, playing the role of perfect Beaumont wife. She remembered how small they had made her feel, how inadequate, how desperately she had tried to belong. Now she walked through the crowd with her chin held high and her daughters at her side, and she felt nothing but calm. Heads turned as they passed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Virginia heard fragments of conversation, recognized a few faces from the old days. Is that Virginia? It cannot be. Who are those girls with her? Look at their eyes. They look like... She let the whispers wash over her without acknowledgement. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Soon enough, they would have their answers. And then, across the deck, she saw him. Everett Beaumont stood near the main staircase, a champagne glass in one hand, a woman half his age on his arm. He was talking to someone important, laughing at something that probably was not funny, playing the role of gracious host. He had aged, Virginia noticed. The dark hair was streaked with silver now. There were lines around his eyes and a softness in his jaw that had not been there before. But he was still handsome, still commanding, still utterly confident in his place at the center of every room. Virginia stopped walking. She waited. It took less than 30 seconds for someone to lean over and whisper in Everett's ear. She watched his expression change, watched him turn toward the entrance, watched his eyes scan the crowd until they found her. And then she watched as his gaze moved from her face to the two teenagers standing at her side. She saw the moment he recognized them, the moment he understood. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the deck. The champagne glass shattered against the deck, crystal fragments catching the light like scattered diamonds. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the gala, drawing every eye in the immediate vicinity to Everett Beaumont, who stood frozen in place, staring across the crowded deck at the woman he had discarded 17 years ago, and at the two teenage girls standing beside her. Virginia watched his face cycle through recognition, confusion, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like fear. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times over the years, had rehearsed what she would say, how she would stand, what expression she would wear. But now that it was happening, she found she did not need the rehearsal. She simply stood, calm and composed, and let him come to her. A crew member rushed forward to clean up the broken glass. The woman on Everett's arm, young and polished in seafoam silk, was asking him something, her voice sharp with concern. But Everett did not hear her. He was already moving through the crowd, his eyes never leaving Virginia's face. The guests parted before him like water before a ship's prow. They sensed something happening, something significant, and Charleston society had always possessed an instinct for drama. Everett stopped 3 feet away from Virginia. Up close, she could see the details the distance had hidden. The deeper lines around his eyes. The slight tremor in his hands. The way his jaw worked as he struggled to find words. "Virginia," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, uncertain, nothing like the smooth confidence she remembered. "Hello, Everett," she replied. "Thank you for the invitation." She watched his eyes move from her face to Maggie, standing at her left, to Claire, standing at her right. She watched him catalogue the evidence he could not deny. The gray-blue eyes that had marked the Beaumont family for generations. The proud jawline. The height, the bearing, the particular way they held their shoulders. His grandfather's portrait hung in the library of the Beaumont estate. Virginia had seen it many times during their marriage. Looking at her daughters now, she knew exactly what Everett was seeing. He started, then stopped. His throat worked. He tried again. "These are my daughters," Virginia said calmly. "Marguerite and Claire. They turned 16 in February." She let the date hang in the air between them. February. 8 months after their June divorce. The mathematics were not complicated. Everett's face had gone pale beneath his tan. The confident host, the master of every room, the man who commanded global business empires, looked suddenly lost. "That is not possible," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We tried for years." The doctors said unlikely, Virginia interrupted gently. "They did not say impossible. Sometimes nature requires patience." Around them, the gala continued, but the immediate vicinity had gone quiet. Guests were pretending not to watch while watching intently. Phones had emerged from clutches and pockets. Charleston's social elite recognized a scandal unfolding, and they would not miss a moment. The woman in seafoam silk pushed through the crowd to Everett's side. She was beautiful in the way that expensive maintenance could achieve, her face carefully preserved, her body carefully maintained. She looked at Virginia with barely concealed hostility. "Everett," she said sharply. "What is going on? Who is this woman?" Everett did not answer. He could not seem to look away from the twins. Maggie spoke for the first time. "We are his daughters," she said. Her voice was clear and carried easily across the watching crowd. "The ones he did not know existed because he divorced our mother for being barren." The word landed like a slap. Virginia saw several women in the crowd flinch. Barren. The old, cruel word, the word that reduced women to their reproductive capacity, the word that had ended her marriage and nearly broken her spirit. Maggie, Virginia said quietly. That is enough. But her daughter was not finished. You threw her away, Maggie continued, her eyes fixed on Everett's face. You told her she was defective. You chose your precious legacy over her. And the whole time, she was pregnant with us. The heirs you wanted so badly were growing inside her while you filed the divorce papers. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jazz quartet had stopped playing. 400 of Charleston's most prominent citizens stood frozen, witnesses to the public unraveling of Everett Beaumont's carefully constructed life. Claire, quieter than her sister, spoke next. We read the newspaper announcements, she said, from when you divorced her. They are archived online. The things people wrote about our mother. The things you let them believe. Everett's companion stepped back, her face cycling through shock and calculation. Virginia could almost see her reassessing the situation, weighing the implications, considering her options. Perhaps, Virginia said, breaking the silence, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Everett nodded mechanically. He seemed incapable of independent thought, his mind still struggling to process the impossible truth standing before him. Follow me, he managed, and turned toward a door that led to the yacht's interior. The private salon was elegantly appointed, all dark wood and leather and the quiet good taste that old money could buy. Everett closed the door behind them, muffling the resumed buzz of conversation from the deck. The four of them stood in the room like opponents before a negotiation. Everett on one side. Virginia and her daughters on the other. 17 years of silence stretched between them. How long have you known? Everett asked finally. He directed the question at the twins, as if hoping they might provide a different answer than their mother. About you specifically? Maggie replied. Since last week. When Mum got your invitation. And before that? Claire answered this time. We knew our father was someone Mum had been married to. Someone who was not ready for a family. She never lied about you existing. She just did not tell us who you were. Everett turned to Virginia. 17 years, he said. His voice had found some of its old edge, hardening into accusation. You kept my children from me for 17 years. Virginia met his gaze without flinching. You kept yourself from them, she replied calmly. When you told me I had failed you. When you called me defective. When you made it clear that you wanted an heir, not a family. You made your choice, Everett. I simply made mine. I had a right to know. Did you? Virginia tilted her head, considering. You divorced me because you believed I could not have children. You discarded me like a broken appliance. Tell me, what exactly would you have done if I had come to you pregnant, after you had already announced to all of Charleston that I was inadequate? Everett opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth of her question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Maggie spoke up. You would have taken us, she said. Your lawyers would have fought for custody. You would have raised us as Beaumont heirs, with all that Beaumont expectation, all that Beaumont pressure. We would have grown up as proof that you were not the failure. As trophies. That is not true, Everett said, but his voice lacked conviction. Claire shook her head slowly. We have spent a week reading about you, she said. About the Beaumont family. About the legacy you care so much about. Mum protected us from all of that. She gave us a life where we could be ourselves, not extensions of your name. Everett looked at his daughters, at these two young women who carried his blood but who were complete strangers to him. Virginia could see him struggling, could see the war between his pride and some deeper emotion he could not name. What do you want? He asked finally. His voice was tired now, defeated. Why did you come? Virginia considered the question. You invited me, she said. I came to answer it. And because my daughters deserve to see where they came from. And now? Now, Virginia said, we will go back to our lives in Edinburgh. The girls have school. I have work. We did not come here seeking anything from you, Everett. Not money. Not recognition. Not a relationship. Everett flinched as if she had struck him. Then why come at all? Claire answered before Virginia could. Because we wanted to see for ourselves, she said, what kind of man our father is. The words were not angry, not accusatory. They were simply honest. And somehow, that made them worse. Everett sat down heavily on the leather sofa, his composure finally cracking. I did not know, he said. His voice was almost pleading. If I had known. If you had known, Virginia interrupted gently, you would have done exactly what Maggie said. You would have fought for control of your heirs. You would have brought them back to Charleston, raised them in this world of expectations and obligations. You would have seen them as the continuation of your legacy, not as children who deserve to be loved for themselves. She paused, letting the words settle. I know you, Everett. I was married to you for 4 years. I watched you make decisions based on what the family name required, never on what your heart wanted. I would not let my daughters grow up that way. Everett looked up at her, and for the first time, Virginia saw something genuine in his face. Not the confident mask he wore for the world. Something raw. Something broken. I have thought about you, he said quietly. Over the years. I have wondered what became of you. Virginia said nothing. I told myself I made the right choice. That the legacy mattered more than anything else. But at night, alone, I would think about the way you looked at me on our wedding day. The way you believed in us. And I would wonder if I had made the worst mistake of my life. Virginia felt her daughter's eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond. You did, she said simply. But it was my good fortune, in the end. Because the worst day of my life led to the best things that ever happened to me. She looked at Maggie and Claire, saw them looking back at her with fierce love. If you had stayed, she continued, I might never have discovered what I was capable of. I might have spent my life trying to be enough for you, never realizing that I was already complete. Your rejection was the greatest gift you ever gave me, Everett, even though you did not mean it that way. Everett stared at her, wordless. A knock at the door interrupted them. A crew member's voice, apologetic and nervous. Mr. Beaumont, the mayor is asking for your speech. And Ms. Dupree is inquiring about your whereabouts. Everett closed his eyes for a moment. Tell them I will be there shortly, he said. He stood, straightening his jacket automatically, trying to reassemble the mask he wore for the world. But his hands were trembling, and his eyes were red, and he looked like a man who had just watched everything he believed about himself crumble into dust. We should go, Virginia said. We have intruded on your evening long enough. Wait, Everett said. Please. I want. He stopped, unable to articulate what he needed or wanted. Perhaps he did not know himself. Claire stepped forward, surprising everyone. You have our information, she said. Mum gave it to your assistant when we came aboard. If you want to know us, you can reach out. But on our terms. Not as your heirs. As ourselves. Everett nodded slowly. And if I do reach out? He asked. Maggie answered. Then we will see what kind of man you really are, she said. Whether you have learned anything from the last 17 years. Virginia touched her daughter's shoulders. Come, she said. It is time to go. They walked out of the salon, leaving Everett alone with the wreckage of his carefully constructed life. On the main deck, the gala was buzzing with barely suppressed excitement. Every guest they passed fell silent, watching them with undisguised curiosity. The whispers would start the moment they were out of earshot, Virginia knew. By morning, the story would be all over Charleston. By the end of the week, it would have spread to every social circle where the Beaumont name carried weight. Virginia did not care. Let them talk. Let them wonder. She had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. The water taxi was waiting at the gangway. Virginia helped her daughters aboard, then turned for one last look at the yacht. Everett had emerged onto the deck. He stood at the railing, watching them go, his figure silhouetted against the glow of the party. He did not wave. He did not call out. He simply stood there, alone in the middle of 400 guests, watching his family disappear across the dark water. Virginia turned away and did not look back. If you have ever walked away from someone who hurt you, knowing that you are finally free, type freedom in the comments. And if you are waiting to see whether Everett can redeem himself after everything he has done, stay with me. The story is far from over. The hotel room was quiet after the chaos of the gala. Maggie and Claire sat on the sofa, still in their formal dresses, processing everything that had happened. Virginia stood by the window, looking out at the city where she had once believed she would spend her life. "Are you all right?" Claire asked. Virginia considered the question. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I thought it would be harder, seeing him again. But I felt nothing. Or not nothing, exactly. Just distance. Like I was watching something happen to someone else." Maggie kicked off her heels. "He looked pathetic," she said. "Standing there, trying to explain himself. All those years of being so important, and he crumbled in 5 minutes." "He is still a person," Claire said quietly. "He made terrible choices, but he is still a person." Maggie looked at her sister. "You feel sorry for him?" Claire shrugged. "I feel something. I do not know what to call it. He is our father. We share half our genes with him. That means something, even if I do not know what." Virginia crossed the room and sat between her daughters. "You are allowed to feel whatever you feel," she said. "About him, about tonight, about all of it. There is no right answer." Maggie leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I am glad we came," she said. "I needed to see him, to understand. And now that you have seen him—" Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Now I know," she said, "what we escaped, what you protected us from." Virginia kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I would do it again," she said. 1,000 times. Claire leaned in from the other side, and the three of them sat together in the quiet room, a family complete unto itself, needing nothing from anyone else. The next morning, Virginia woke early. She stood on the hotel balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over Charleston Harbor. The yacht was still visible in the distance, smaller now, no longer lit, its party ended. Her phone buzzed with messages. Beatrice, worried and wanting details. A few former acquaintances from her Charleston days, suddenly remembering her existence. And one message that made her pause. It was from a number she did not recognize, but the name attached to it was familiar. Augustine Beaumont. Virginia stared at the screen. Everett's mother. The matriarch of the Beaumont family. A woman who had always been kind to Virginia during her marriage, even as others had looked down on her modest background. The message was simple. "Virginia, I have prayed for 17 years that you would return. I know I have no right to ask, but I would very much like to meet my granddaughters. Please. Before it is too late." Virginia read the message 3 times. Augustine must be in her late 70s now. The phrase "before it is too late" suggested failing health, limited time. She thought about what it would mean to bring her daughters into the Beaumont world, even briefly. She thought about the risks, the complications, the potential for pain. But she also thought about Claire's words last night. "He is our father." That means something. If that was true of Everett, it was also true of Augustine. The twins had a grandmother they had never known. Perhaps they deserved the chance to know her, even if they chose not to pursue the relationship. She forwarded the message to the twins, who were still sleeping, with a note. "Your grandmother wants to meet you. It is your choice. I will support whatever you decide." 2 hours later, Maggie and Claire emerged from their room, still in pajamas, having read the message and discussed it between themselves. "We want to go," Claire said. Virginia nodded. "Are you sure?" Maggie crossed her arms. "She is not him," she said. "She did not divorce you. She did not throw us away. We should give her a chance to be different." Virginia smiled at her daughter's fierce fairness. "Then we will go," she said. "This afternoon." Augustine Beaumont lived in a wing of the original family estate, a graceful antebellum house that had survived the Civil War, countless hurricanes, and 5 generations of Beaumonts. A private nurse greeted them at the door and led them through halls lined with portraits of ancestors, past furniture that had been in the family for a century, to a sunny sitting room where the matriarch waited. Augustine was smaller than Virginia remembered, shrunken by age and illness, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She sat in a wingback chair by the window, a blanket across her lap despite the warmth of the day, and she watched them enter with an expression that mixed hope and fear. "Virginia," she said. Her voice was thin but steady. "You came." Virginia approached and took the older woman's outstretched hand. "Of course," she said. "You asked." Augustine's eyes moved to the twins, who hung back near the doorway, uncertain. "And these are my granddaughters," she said. Her voice caught on the word. "Look at them. They have the Beaumont eyes." Maggie stepped forward first, her natural protectiveness giving her courage. "I am Marguerite," she said. "But everyone calls me Maggie." Augustine smiled. "Marguerite was my mother's name," she said. "I always hoped someone would use it again." Claire followed her sister. "I am Claire," she said. "It is nice to meet you." Augustine gestured for them to come closer, and they did, settling on a small sofa near her chair. Virginia remained standing, watching, letting her daughters navigate this connection on their own terms. "I owe you an apology," Augustine said, addressing Virginia. "All those years ago, when Everett divorced you, I should have spoken up. I knew he was making a mistake. I knew it in my bones. But I was a coward. I told myself it was not my place to interfere in my son's marriage." Virginia shook her head. "You were always kind to me," she said. "You have nothing to apologize for." "I have everything to apologize for," Augustine insisted. "I let my son throw away the best thing that ever happened to him. And because of my cowardice, I missed 17 years of these beautiful girls' lives." She reached out and took Maggie's hand. "Tell me about yourselves," she said. "Tell me everything. We have so much time to make up for." And so they talked. For 2 hours, the twins told their grandmother about their lives in Edinburgh, about Maggie's music and Claire's art, about their school and their friends and their mother's business, about the life Virginia had built for them, brick by brick, without any help from the Beaumont fortune. Augustine listened with rapt attention, asking questions, laughing at their stories, occasionally wiping tears from her eyes. "Your mother is remarkable," she said at one point, looking at Virginia with something like reverence. "I always knew she was too good for Everett. I just never had the courage to say it." Virginia felt something loosen in her chest. Some old wound she had not known she was still carrying. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." When it was time to leave, Augustine held each of the twins close, pressing kisses to their foreheads, making them promise to stay in touch. "You are Beaumonts," she told them, "whether you carry the name or not. This history is yours if you want it. But more importantly, you are your mother's daughters. Never forget that." At the door, she pulled Virginia aside. "He will try to make amends," she said quietly. "Everett. I know my son. He will realize what he has lost and he will try to get it back." Virginia nodded. "I know." "Do not make it easy for him," Augustine said. "He needs to earn it. He needs to understand that some things cannot be bought or charmed or negotiated. He needs to become a different man than he has been." Virginia squeezed the older woman's hand. "I learned that lesson a long time ago," she said. "But I appreciate you saying it." Augustine smiled. "Take care of those girls," she said. "They are miracles." "I know," Virginia replied. "They always have been." The remaining days in Charleston passed quietly. Virginia took her daughters on a tour of the city, showing them the places that had mattered during her years there. The museum where she had worked. The gallery where she had met Everett. The church where they had married. She told them stories as they walked. Not bitter stories, not angry ones. Just honest accounts of a young woman who had fallen in love with a man she did not really know, who had believed that love could conquer anything, who had learned the hard way that some people valued names more than hearts. The twins listened and asked questions and formed their own conclusions. "He wasted you," Maggie said at one point, standing in front of the church. He had this incredible woman, and he threw her away because of something she could not control. He did, Virginia agreed. But I wasted myself too, for a while. I spent those years trying to be what he wanted instead of figuring out who I was. His rejection forced me to become myself. I cannot entirely regret that. Claire, thoughtful as always, added her own perspective. Some people need to lose everything before they understand what they had, she said. Maybe that is what is happening to him now. Maybe, Virginia said. But it is not our job to save him from his own mistakes. On their last night in Charleston, Virginia took the twins to dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. They ate well and laughed often and talked about returning to Edinburgh, to their normal lives, to the world they had built together. Halfway through dessert, the restaurant fell silent. Virginia looked up and saw Everett standing in the doorway. He looked different than he had at the gala. Less polished, more uncertain. He was wearing casual clothes, no suit, no careful presentation. He looked like a man who had not slept well in days. "Virginia," he said, approaching their table. "I am sorry to interrupt. I tried calling, but you did not answer." Virginia set down her fork. "We were having a family dinner," she said calmly. "I know. He stopped, struggling for words. "I needed to see you before you left. To say some things." He looked at the twins, who were watching him with guarded expressions. "May I sit down?" he asked. "Please. Just for a few minutes." Virginia glanced at her daughters. Maggie shrugged. Claire nodded almost imperceptibly. "Sit," Virginia said. Everett pulled over a chair and sat at the edge of their table, like a petitioner before a court. "I have been thinking," he said, "since the gala. About everything you said. About everything I did. And—" Maggie prompted, her voice cool. Everett took a deep breath. "I was wrong," he said. "About all of it. About what mattered, about what I wanted, about everything." He looked at Virginia. "I have spent 17 years building an empire. Hotels, yachts, properties all over the world. Everyone tells me how successful I am, how impressive, how powerful. And none of it means anything. None of it ever did." He paused, his voice catching. "I am 51 years old, and I have never been a father. I have never watched a child grow up, never worried about school or friends, or whether they were happy. I threw away that chance because I was too arrogant to see what I already had." Claire spoke up. "You cannot get those years back," she said. "We are not children anymore. You cannot raise us now." "I know," Everett said. "I know I cannot undo what I did. But I would like—" He hesitated. "I would like the chance to know you. Not as my heirs, not as Beaumonts. Just as people. As my daughters." "Why should we give you that chance?" Maggie asked. Her voice was not angry, just genuinely curious. Everett considered the question for a long moment. "You should not," he admitted. "I have not earned it. I have not earned anything from any of you. But I am asking anyway, because I have finally realized that some things are worth more than pride." He looked at Virginia. "You tried to tell me that once," he said. "That love was more important than legacy. I did not listen. I was too certain of my own rightness to hear what you were saying." Virginia said nothing. She let him continue. "I am not asking for forgiveness," Everett said. "I know I do not deserve that. I am just asking for a chance. To prove that I can be different. To prove that I have learned something from losing everything that mattered." The silence at the table stretched for a long moment. Then Claire spoke. "You can write to us," she said. "Letters. Actual letters, not emails or texts. Tell us about yourself. Not about your business or your success. About you. What you think, what you feel, what you wish you had done differently. And we will decide," Maggie added, "whether we want to write back." Everett nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said. "That is more than I deserve." He turned to Virginia. "And you?" he asked. "Is there any chance?" Virginia held up a hand. No, she said firmly but not unkindly. That door closed 17 years ago. But the door to your daughter's lives was never entirely locked. Whether you can open it depends on who you become from here. Everett absorbed this, his face showing the pain of finality. I understand, he said. Thank you for being honest. He stood, preparing to leave, then paused. The woman I divorced, he said quietly. She was strong enough to survive everything I did to her. The woman sitting before me now is even stronger. I wasted you, Virginia. And I will regret it for the rest of my life. He nodded to the twins, turned, and walked out of the restaurant. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Maggie picked up her fork and took another bite of dessert. He might be worth knowing, she said grudgingly. Eventually. Claire smiled. We will see, she said. Virginia looked at her daughters, these two remarkable young women who had inherited the best parts of both their parents, and felt a peace settle over her heart. We will see, she agreed. What follows is not the story of a sudden transformation. It is the story of slow change, of small steps, of a man learning to become something he had never been. Everett's first letter arrived in Edinburgh 3 weeks after they returned home. It was handwritten, 5 pages long, and it contained no mention of business or success or the Beaumont Empire. Instead, it told the story of his childhood, of a father who was distant and demanding, who measured worth in achievements rather than affection, of a mother who loved him but was too afraid to challenge her husband's expectations, of growing up believing that the family name was the only thing that mattered, that love was a weakness to be overcome. I am not making excuses, he wrote. I am trying to explain how I became the man who hurt your mother so badly. I am trying to understand it myself. Claire wrote back first. A short letter, guarded but not hostile. She asked questions about his family, about the house where he grew up, about the expectations he had inherited. Maggie took longer to respond. When she did, her letter was more challenging, pushing back against his rationalizations, demanding that he take full responsibility for his choices. Everett answered every letter promptly and honestly. He did not make excuses. He did not try to charm or manipulate. He simply told the truth about who he was and who he was trying to become. Months passed. The letters continued. Virginia read them all, at her daughter's insistence, watching Everett reveal himself page by page. She saw a man she had never known. A man who had been afraid his whole life, afraid of failure, afraid of not being enough, afraid of the weight of expectations he had never asked to carry. She saw how that fear had calcified into arrogance, how his certainty had been a defense against doubt, how he had sacrificed love for the illusion of control. She did not forgive him. But she began to understand him. 1 year after the gala, Everett came to Edinburgh. He called ahead this time, asking permission, making clear that he expected nothing. Virginia agreed to let him visit, and she watched from the window as he walked up the path to her townhouse, nervous as a teenager on a first date. The visit was awkward at first. Everett sat in her living room, surrounded by evidence of the life she had built without him, unable to pretend he belonged there. But the twins drew him out. Claire showed him her sketchbooks, her drawings of historic buildings, her plans to study architecture. Maggie played piano for him, watching his face as the music filled the room. Everett wept. Silently, without shame, he wept for everything he had missed. They went to dinner that night, the 4 of them, at a small Italian restaurant the twins had chosen. Virginia watched Everett navigate the unfamiliar territory of fatherhood, asking questions, listening to the answers, learning who his daughters were. He did not try to buy their affection. He did not name-drop or boast or steer the conversation toward his achievements. He simply listened. It was, Virginia realized, the first time she had ever seen him simply listen. After dinner, they walked through the old town, the twins pointing out their favorite spots, the places that had shaped their childhood. This is where I learned to ride a bike, Claire said, gesturing to a quiet park. This is where Mum took us for ice cream when we had bad days, Maggie added. Everett looked at the ordinary places, the everyday landmarks of a life he had not shared, and Virginia saw him understanding, perhaps for the first time, what he had lost. You built something beautiful, he said quietly to Virginia as the twins walked ahead. Something I could never have given them. I know, Virginia said. He nodded, accepting this truth without argument. "I am glad," he said, "that they had you. That they have you. I just wish I had been wise enough to have it too." Virginia said nothing. There was nothing to say. 2 years after the gala, Everett attended Maggie's first major piano performance. He sat in the audience, anonymous among hundreds of strangers, and watched his daughter command the stage with a confidence that reminded him of himself at his best. Afterward, backstage, Maggie embraced him for the first time. It was brief, uncertain, more acknowledgement than affection. But it was something. 3 years after the gala, Claire graduated at the top of her secondary school class. Her acceptance letter to Oxford's architecture program arrived the same week, and Everett sent flowers with a simple note. "I am proud of you. Not because you are a Beaumont, but because you are extraordinary." Claire called him that evening. They talked for an hour, about her plans, her dreams, her fears about leaving home. Everett listened without offering advice, without trying to solve her problems, without suggesting that his connections could help. He was learning. 4 years after the gala, Augustine Beaumont passed away. She went peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by family. The twins flew to Charleston for the funeral, their first return since that fateful night. Everett met them at the airport, older now, more gray in his hair, softer in his bearing. The funeral was a grand affair, as befitting the Beaumont matriarch. But afterward, at the family estate, Everett took the twins aside and showed them something private. A letter Augustine had written before she died. Addressed to them. "My beautiful granddaughters," she wrote. "I wish I had known you longer. But I am grateful for every moment we had. You are the best of your mother and the best of what your father could have been. Never forget that love is the only legacy that matters." Maggie wept. Claire held her sister and wept too. And Everett stood apart, watching his daughters grieve for a grandmother they had only known for 4 years, and understood the depth of what his choices had cost everyone. 5 years after the gala, Virginia stood in the completed wing of an Edinburgh hospital, surrounded by the restoration team that had brought the Victorian building back to life. It was her most ambitious project yet, a complete restoration of a 19th-century medical facility, transformed into a state-of-the-art treatment center while preserving every significant historical feature. The press had come for the opening. The architects and preservationists. The hospital administrators and grateful donors. And Everett, sitting in the back row of the dedication ceremony, unannounced, watching the woman who had once been his wife accept accolades for work that would outlast them all. Afterward, he approached her. "Congratulations," he said. "This is extraordinary." "Thank you," Virginia replied. "I did not expect to see you here." Everett shrugged. "I keep track of your projects," he admitted. "I read the architectural journals now. I understand maybe 10% of what they say, but I read them anyway." Virginia laughed despite herself. "Why?" "Because it is how I understand who you became," he said. "The woman I threw away. I want to know her, even if I can never have her." Virginia studied his face. The years had changed him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter. Something almost like wisdom. "You have changed," she said. "I am trying." They stood in silence for a moment, two people who had once been married, who had created 2 extraordinary daughters together, who would never be lovers again but were learning to be something else. "I have a question," Virginia said. "Something I have wondered for years." Everett waited. "That night, at the gala, you dropped your champagne glass. What were you thinking, in that moment, when you saw them?" Everett was quiet for a long time. "I was thinking that God has a sense of humor," he said finally. "I spent 17 years believing I had made the right choice. Telling myself that the legacy mattered more than love, that I had sacrificed my heart for the family name. And then I looked across that deck and saw my legacy standing right in front of me. 2 beautiful, brilliant young women with my eyes and your heart. Everything I had wanted, everything I had traded my marriage to obtain, and I had missed all of it." He paused, his voice thick. "I spent 17 years building an empire," he continued. "And in 17 seconds, I realized it was all worthless." Virginia nodded slowly. "That is what I thought," she said. "But I needed to hear you say it." She touched his arm briefly. "I do not forgive you," she said. "I am not sure I ever will. But I understand you now. And I am glad, for the girl's sake, that you have become someone worth knowing." Everett covered her hand with his own. "That is more than I deserve," he said. "Yes," Virginia agreed. "It is." She removed her hand and stepped back. "Go home, Everett. Call your daughters. Tell them you love them. That is all you can do now. Is it enough?" Virginia looked at him with something that was almost compassion. "It is going to have to be," she said. The final scene of this story takes place on a summer evening, 7 years after the gala. Maggie is a professional pianist now, performing with orchestras across Europe. Claire is finishing her architecture degree at Oxford, already fielding job offers from prestigious firms. Virginia sits on the terrace of her Edinburgh townhouse, watching the sunset, a glass of wine in her hand. She is 51 years old, successful beyond anything she could have imagined, surrounded by the life she built from nothing. Inside, she can hear her daughters laughing. They are visiting for the weekend, home from their separate lives, reunited in the place where they grew up. Everett calls regularly now. He has dinner with the twins whenever they are in the same city. He sends birthday presents and graduation gifts and letters that continue to reveal the man he is still becoming. He has not remarried. He has stepped back from the company, letting younger executives run the day-to-day operations. He spends his time traveling, reading, learning about the art and architecture that Virginia loves. He is trying to become someone she might have respected, someone their daughters can be proud of. It is too late, of course. The marriage is long over. The lost years cannot be recovered. The children he never raised are adults now, formed by their mother's love and strength. But he is trying. And that, Virginia has decided, is enough. She hears the door open behind her. Claire emerges onto the terrace, carrying her own glass of wine. "You look thoughtful," Claire says, sitting beside her mother. "I was thinking about your father," Virginia admits. Claire nods. "He called this morning. He wants to know if we are coming to Charleston for Christmas." "And what did you tell him?" "I said maybe," Claire replies. "Maggie says definitely not, but you know how she is. She will change her mind by November." Virginia smiles. "You two are good to him," she says. "Better than he deserves." Claire shrugs. "He is our father," she says simply. "We cannot change that. We can only decide what to do with it." Virginia looks at her daughter, at this thoughtful young woman who has grown up so wise. "When did you become so smart?" she asks. Claire grins. "I learned from my mother," she says. They sit together in comfortable silence, watching the light fade over Edinburgh. Inside, Maggie begins to play piano. The music drifts through the open door, beautiful and complex, filling the evening air. Virginia thinks about the invitation that arrived 17 years ago. About the yacht party she attended with her daughters. About the look on Everett's face when he saw them for the first time. She thinks about all the years between then and now. The hard years and the good ones. The struggles and the triumphs. The life she built from the ruins of the one he destroyed. She has no regrets. How could she? Everything that happened, even the pain, even the betrayal, led her to this moment. This terrace. This sunset. These daughters. This life. Everett lost everything when he divorced her. He knows that now. He will spend the rest of his days knowing it, living with it, trying to atone for it. And Virginia? Virginia gained everything. Not through revenge. Not through confrontation. Just through living. Through building. Through loving. That is the only justice that matters. The quiet, irreversible kind. The justice of becoming who you were always meant to be. The music continues as the stars come out over Edinburgh. Virginia closes her eyes and smiles. And if this story touched your heart, if you have ever been underestimated, discarded, or told you were not enough, remember this. The people who throw us away do not get to decide our worth. We decide that ourselves, through how we live, through what we build, through the love we give to those who deserve it. The best revenge is not destruction. It is becoming so complete, so fulfilled, so whole, that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. Virginia did not destroy Everett Beaumont. She did something far more powerful. She forgot him. And in that forgetting, she found herself. Thank you for listening to this story, my beloved audience. If it moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, remember that your value is not determined by those who fail to see it. It is proven by the life you choose to live.